Well, today we're going to discuss the gospel reading from the 12th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and it comes from Luke. And it asks the big question, who do you say I am? And Peter answers emphatically, the Messiah of God. And this reading comes from Luke 9, verses 18 to 24. And let's just start by reading the gospel. Once when Jesus was praying in solitude and the disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They said in reply, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others, one of the ancient prophets has arisen." Then he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter said in reply, "The Messiah of God." He rebuked them and directed them not to tell this to anyone. He said, "The Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised." Then he said to them, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." Well, who do you say that I am? This is the question that ultimately we need to answer for ourselves, each and every one of us. Now, Peter has been with Jesus for the last several years. He has seen him do all these miracles of healing, especially for those who have faith in him as being sent from God. The preceding verses were Jesus feeding the 5,000. So Peter has seen something going on here. This is not an ordinary man. This is somebody who he certainly has never seen before, doing things that he has never seen before. And so this is actually the moment of truth for Peter. And, I'm always struck by the enormity of the thought he had, because he's the first one to ever have this thought that this is the Messiah of God. This is the anointed one. This is the one that God sent. And, sometimes we wonder, well, he's been traveling with them for all these years and everything else, and how hasn't he recognized this earlier? And when we think about it, we know Jesus from our childhood. So this is just normal thinking to us. And we've had 2,000 years of history and theology and homilies, and so this is pretty obvious to us. But here's the man who had to have this thought and express it and then bet his life on it for the very first time. So ultimately, as I said, this has to play out in our lives as well. We need to confess Jesus as Lord. And from this will flow the grace from God that he has promised us. He rebuked them and directed them not to tell this to anyone. Now, this seems like an odd thing. I mean, Jesus has just been told by one of his disciples that he's the Messiah of God, and the first thing he does is turn around and rebuke them and tell them not to tell it to anyone. Now, why would this possibly be? Well, Jesus does not want them spreading this because the crowds really aren't ready to hear the news the way he is the Messiah as opposed to the Messiah they're anticipating. The Messiah they're anticipating is someone from David's line that will come and probably look like a conquering hero, a conquering general that's going to reestablish the kingdom of Israel, expel the Romans, make it powerful the way it was in the past. And none of these things is what Jesus is going to do And so if they have that expectation put on them, they're just going to be confused even more by what happens at his passion and resurrection. Christ actually comes much more as the suffering servant, as is foretold in Isaiah. And he actually is coming to fulfill the will of the Father. So Christ offers himself in total self-giving for our redemption, which is almost the opposite of the image of the Messiah that they were looking for. He came to bear the sins of the world once and for all, for the sacrifice that would win our salvation and then reconcile us with God. The kingdom Christ preached was a kingdom of heaven, on earth, which he was sent by the Father to inaugurate. I'm going to read verse 22. He said, "The Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised." So he's starting to prepare the disciples for what's going to happen as he carries out God's plan for salvation. Now, this is not at all the way we would have planned the salvation of our humanness, but it is the plan that only God could have conceived. And as Christ tells Peter in Mark's gospel, after this same passage is being carried out, you are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. And it's interesting, we do that all the time, at least certainly I do, and I catch myself at it. And it's amazing how God thinks differently than we do. Isaiah tells us that my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and my ways are higher than your ways. That's God speaking to Isaiah. So that Christ's suffering would be his path to glory, and that each one of us will travel on our way to the Father. So he's actually telling us what our path is going to be to heaven. It's not going to be some smooth sailing all the way. It's going to be one of living in the world, even though we're not of the world. It's going to be bumpy on occasion. But this is the way that he goes to heaven, and as we're following him to heaven, it is our path as well. So in verses 23 and 24, then he said to all, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." I read somewhere, and this has always stuck with me, false religion tells us, fear not, trust God, and he will keep you from suffering what you are most afraid of. True religion, on the other hand, tells us, fear not, trust God. You will almost certainly suffer what you are most afraid of, but you have nothing to fear. So why is this so? Well, because you are only fully open to God's grace when you have come to trust him and know that he is present to you always in your suffering. And with false religion, you're always living waiting for the other shoe to drop. Times are good right now. Oh boy, they got to be coming bad soon. Do I have enough wealth to get me through? If I have enough wealth, I'll be fine. But how much is enough? With true religion, trusting God and abandoning yourself to his divine providence, you have hope. And in the middle of the chaotic world we live in, you experience joy. You know, it's interesting, when you try to explain this to a non-believer, that you're going through a very rough patch in your life and you are joy-filled, it really makes sense to nobody unless they have faith in Christ and are walking the path with him. The other thing is, in verse 23, it says that we are to do this daily. So we must daily give up control of our lives to God. But the good news is that he ends up carrying the heavy end of our crosses. Verse 24 tells us that we must literally die to ourselves to follow Christ on his journey home to heaven. So, this is worth repeating, I think. Christ gives himself in total self-giving, and he did this because he loves us to the end. And we are to imitate him in this. It's not easy, but this is the path that we have chosen and that he has chosen for us. So this is the extraordinary Jubilee of mercy called by the Pope. And the spiritual and corporal works of mercy fulfill Christ's conditions for discipleship. And I think that if we read them and live them out in our lives, we will see that that's absolutely true. God bless you.